The Zelda timeline is a very sacred entity within the Zelda community. Even before Nintendo established a timeline in Hyrule Historia and later Zelda Encyclopedia, fans were trying to piece together the timeline. However, after 6 years with Nintendo's most recent version of the timeline, and with them not adding their newest games onto it, fans have been acting strange. They accuse Nintendo of never caring about the story in the first place, which isn't true at all, and often shows lots of hate towards the company. Even the fans such as myself who work hard to rearrange the timeline to make more sense get discredited despite our hard work by these haters. That is when I finally had enough. I decided that if rearranging wasn't good enough, then why don't I just start from scratch and forget about the timeline altogether? And that's what leads us into this series, where we will be building a new Zelda timeline that makes the most sense out of any that exist. In the previous video I made, we discussed the formula of how this will be done, so go check that out before this one if you haven't already. But anyway, let's jump right into the very beginning of our great quest. Known as the Hyrule Fantasy, The Legend of Zelda in Japan, and just The Legend of Zelda in most localization, this game was revolutionary for its time, and if your grandparents owned an NES in the 80s, then they most likely played this game, and your parents probably grew up on it, most likely. There was no game like Zelda at the time, and it was great. Its story, its gameplay, the original Legend of Zelda had everything you needed to keep players engaged for hours. And for how short of a game it is, there are actually lots of details packed within the story and world that will have a big impact on the Zelda timeline. In order to discover and piece together all the details in this game, we'll need to explain my findings in a certain order. I will first go over the lore pertaining to the main story of the game, and explain my findings for that. I will then go over the geography of the game and point out any useful information about it. Lastly, we'll go over the different groups of people in the game, as well as the monsters that creep all over the world. So now that you know what to expect me to explain, let us begin. When starting the game and not pressing start on the title screen, the game will present to you a poorly localized version of the backstory, depending on what localization you are part of. What it explains is the backstory of how Prince Darkness Ganon stole the Triforce of Power, or excuse me, one with the Triforce of Power. And before he could get the one of the Triforce with Wisdom, Princess Zelda split it into 8 pieces and spread them across all of Hyrule. And then the game tells you that Link must find these pieces and save the princess, who was kidnapped by Ganon. Now, as I mentioned before, this was poorly localized and wasn't fixed for a long time, until the mini NES came out in 2016. The wording was redone and fixed to make a lot more sense, and even though the story it's telling is the same, the wording of it just flows so much more nicely and is easier to understand. After this part of the game, the player is free to go wherever they like, and all they have to do is go to each labyrinth, find the piece of the Triforce in it, and assemble the pieces to take down Ganon once and for all and save Princess Zelda. In the end, she tells Link that he's the hero of Hyrule, and that peace has at last returned to Hyrule. It's a sweet ending to the first Zelda game that came out, and the lore has sounded really simple, but don't worry, I'm just getting started. That may be all the game tells you, but back in the day, if you wanted to know more about that game, you had to read its manual, which for Zelda contained a full 2 pages of even more backstory than what we went over. Now, I'm not going to read everything from both the English and translated Japanese versions of the manuals, but I'll read off the quotes that are different from each other and compare each version to see which is more accurate. So both start off relatively the same way, explaining that a long time ago, there was an age of chaos in a little kingdom in the land of Hyrule. A legend was being passed down for generations about a sacred artifact called the Triforce, which possessed mysterious powers. It was this artifact that Ganon sought power from, and he would do anything to take it all for himself. This is where the two versions of the manual word things differently. In the English version, Ganon is referred to as the Prince of Darkness, where in the Japanese version, he is known as the Great Demon King. So, which title is more accurate for Ganon? To figure this out, I did some research on the meanings of these titles in Japan, and I came across some interesting results. Prince of Darkness, or Yami no Oshi, is a title or name used to refer to the devil, or ruler of darkness. Demon King, or Mau, refers to a demonic, sorceress king who tries to prevent people from doing good. From the backstory we went over earlier, we know that Ganon tried to stop Princess Zelda from doing good. Yes, he was late and Zelda already hid the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, but he wanted to prevent the good deeds that she had done, which matched up with the meaning of Demon King. And plus, he was the king of the demons in the underworld, so the demonic sorceress king meaning matches up as well. Prince of Darkness refers to a specific being, where Demon King can apply to anyone or anything that has the traits. So it is in my belief that Ganon's accurate title is not the Prince of Darkness, but instead a Demon King. Another difference between the two versions of the manual has to do with Impa, the old woman who was sent by Princess Zelda to find someone courageous enough to put together the Triforce of Wisdom and stop Ganon. You see, like how Ganon had two different titles, Impa was also called something else in the Japanese version of the manual. Most of us know Impa as Zelda's nursemaid, who is assigned to watch over the princess. But what the Japanese manual reveals to us is that Impa did more than just watch over Zelda. The manual refers to Impa as a wet nurse, a type of nursemaid that feeds the princess for the queen. So now we know that Impa was practically a mother to Zelda instead of just someone who watched over her. These two titles don't really mean anything too different, but I thought the Japanese version just added more lore to the game, and I'll take extra lore anytime for this series. These were the only two major differences I could find between the backstory of the Japanese and localized versions of the manuals, for they both tell of how Impa was almost killed by Ganon's henchmen he sent out, but then Link came and saved her by skillfully confusing the enemy and taking them out. And then the manuals go on about how Link was burning with a sense of justice and began the quest to put together the Triforce of Wisdom, defeat Ganon, and save Zelda. The line that states Link skillfully confused the enemy always had me curious of how exactly he beat them, because he doesn't have a sword with him at this time. When you just begin a new game, you will notice that Link already has his shield, so he probably used that to bash the enemies or something like that. But how did Link confuse them? Well, if you read further into the manual, you might find the answer. In the section describing the many items Link can collect, the bait description states that Link can use it to lure the enemy and bump them off as they come to eat it. So does this mean that to save Impa, Link used the bait he had to confuse them and then take them out with his shield? This is just my speculation on this, but let me know if it makes more sense or not. But that, my friends, is really all of the lore pertaining to the main story. We will do a recap later on the video, but let's move on to talk about the geography of Zelda 1986. The backstory told in all versions of the manual state that the era of chaos occurred in a little kingdom in the land of Hyrule, or in a little kingdom located in the Hyrule region according to the Japanese version. This is where the Triforce of Wisdom and power rested for many generations, until Ganon stole one and kidnapped Princess Zelda. The manuals state that Impa was ordered to secretly escape into the land and go find a man with enough courage to destroy the evil Ganon. So this means that Impa had left the little kingdom and fled deeper into the land of Hyrule. The entire overworld that we explore is just a part of a greater land, but not quite near the kingdom where the princess and Impa were from, which is why we never see a castle in this game. The world we explore is filled with lakes, rivers, beaches, forests, and mountains. The only areas that are given specific names are the Lost Woods, which are in the southwestern part of the map, the Graveyard, which is just north of that, Death Mountain, the hills infested with Lynels, and the home of Ganon, and the Lost Hills, which is the secret area that leads you to the level 5 dungeon. Within this overworld, there are entrances to labyrinths located within the underworld, a haven for dangerous monsters. It is within this realm that the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom are hidden, and where Link needs to go to collect them all. These labyrinths all have a similar design, with concrete tiles and brick walls that are all different colors depending on which level you are in. These labyrinths can range from a simple setup of rooms to very complex mazes that are easy to get lost in. It is these labyrinths in the underworld and the lush greenery of the overworld that make up the world of this game, a part of a land known as Hyrule. For being the first Zelda game in the series, there are not a whole lot of races presented within this game. Counting out Ganon, there are only Hylians and humans within this game. You see, Hylians are human-like people that have pointed ears, which include Link, Zelda, Impa, and some of the old men, which we'll talk about soon. The humans of the game, who have rounded ears, contain all the old women and merchants of Hyrule. What many players might not notice is that there are 2 different types of old men. The Hylian ones are all the old men who are in the labyrinths to help the hero succeed in his quest, and the human ones are any old men that are in the overworld. And then, of course, Ganon is the only one left in this list, but we already went over what makes him a Demon King, so we can move on to talking about the monsters within the game. I won't be explaining the lore of every monster to rebuild the timeline, mostly because that would take way too long to do, and Zelda lore already has a great quality video on that. But I at least want to list off the names of the monsters we can use for future reference throughout the series. There are 2 total categories of enemies within this game, which include the overworld and underworld enemies. The ones in the overworld include Tektites, Octoroks, Levers, Peahats, Moblins, Armos Knights, Genies, Lynels, and Zora, which was accidentally misspelled as Zola in localization. The underworld monsters are the more powerful group, containing Zols, Gels, Ropes, Vires, Keith, Stalfos, Wallmasters, Goriyas, Wizrobes, Darknuts, Pole's Voices, Landmolas, Like-Likes, Gibdos, Muldorms, Dodongos, Manhandlas, Aquamentus, Patras, Digdoggers, Gomas, Gleoks, Bubbles, Traps, and Stone Statues. Another thing that classifies the level of a ton of enemies is their color variations, with the weakest being red and the strongest being blue. All I know is that this game has so much variety when it comes to its enemies than many other Zelda games in the series. And lastly, the part of the video most of you are here for. We will use all of the information presented in this video to start building the Zelda timeline. Of course, it's not going to be complex because this is the first game, but after a few episodes, this step will be very complex. So, the earliest event that can be explained is that Princess Zelda is born, and is cared for by not her mother, but her wet nurse Impa, who watched over and fed her. Growing up into royalty, Zelda took it upon herself to guard the Triforce of Wisdom and Power, and she was doing great for a while. But one day, demons led by the Demon King Ganon broke into the kingdom and stole the Triforce of Power. Before he could get the other Triforce, Zelda broke it into 8 pieces and scattered it across the land of Hyrule beyond the kingdom. She then sent Impa to search for a man who was courageous enough to defeat Ganon. Hearing about this, Ganon kidnapped Zelda and locked her away within his home in Death Mountain. As Impa ran through the wilderness in search of a hero, she was eventually cornered by Ganon's minions and was almost killed. That would have been the case, but out of nowhere an adventurer in green defeated the monsters and saved Impa's life. This was Link, and after hearing the events that had occurred, he felt like it was his responsibility to save Zelda. Thus, he began his quest to collect the Triforce pieces in the labyrinths, and put them together in order to defeat Ganon and save Zelda. After killing Ganon, Link was able to take back the Triforce of Power, and at last, the era of chaos was over, and Hyrule would see peace once again. So this, my friends, is the start to the Zelda timeline. It is very simple now, but over time this will grow into a very complex timeline and well thought out. One reminder worth sharing is that we are looking at this as if no other Zelda games exist yet, like going back in time or something like that. This means they can't disagree with the timeline right now using information from other games. We will get there, but for this episode, only Zelda 1986 lore counts. Except for the Hylian and human lore, I just felt like I had to point that out in this video, or it wouldn't fit in any other video. Anyways, thank you all so much for participating in the first episode in this series. I am looking forward to continuing further and can't wait to see what the new Zelda timeline will look like. Before the next episode releases though, I will have 2 Echoes of Wisdom videos I want to work on while playing Adventure of Link. Because, if you couldn't tell from my trailer reaction video, I am pretty hyped for this upcoming Zelda game.
Can you ride horses? Yes! Yes!
Subscribe for those videos as well as this timeline series, and be sure to become a great member in my layer via Discord to just hang out and chat with us about Zelda. We have some great people there who present really great things regarding the series, and we can't wait to see you there. Also, feel free to follow me on Twitter for casual Zelda posts, but whatever you decide to do, I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you on our next adventure.